thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you today, and for this being the first in a series of 7 webinars, which are really, to me, are a very fantastic opportunity because, as Sanya says, we are in a very strange time that in a way the COVID crisis, of course, is a crisis in its own right, but it also really highlights the kind of weaknesses that we had in the museum sector and in all other sectors that existed before the crisis. And so what we'll be explaining over this series, I hope, will help you all to be more resilient for the future, both in terms of individually, your organizations and your communities. And so this idea I came up with last year. I mean, my background is as an ecologist, and I worked on bird conservation, and then I worked in museums for a long time, for nearly 20 years, and over time became more and more interested in sustainability and really the potential of museums to contribute towards a sustainable future. And this is where I came up with this idea of curating tomorrow, is that it's saying that that the future doesn't just happen by accident, it happens based on our decisions today. And also some of these museum skills that we have about curation and other museum skills have a real world relevance. But also museums are connected to the world. What we do can really contribute to society. And the logo that the designer I worked with, she put together is like a leaf with a human face in it. And it's the idea that people and nature shape one another, because I'm very, very passionate about nature. And so what I'm going to talk about, although today's webinar is about museums and the Sustainable Development Goals, but those relate to various other initiatives and agendas. And the way I tend to work is I write these guides, which you can get for free, and then they help people to get started. And then if people want a bit more support, they pay for my time, and that's what provides me with a livelihood. So the first one of these I did last year about collections and biodiversity conservation. And there's a bit.ly link there at the top that you can use to access the guide. The middle one, I think I wrote because I think it's particularly relevant to today's challenges, because it's about how museums can there's a thing called disaster risk reduction, which is an approach for building resilience. It's an absolutely excellent approach, and I want people to be able to make use of that. And the last one is about museums and human rights, which will come out in December for International Human Rights Day. But the one we're going to work with most today is one that I wrote last year called Museums and the Sustainable Development Goals. And again, you can get that for free at the bottom from the link. And I wrote this because I was on I still am on the ICOM Sustainability Working Group, and I was doing some thinking about this. It's like, well, what are the things that museums can do? And so what I'll talk about today is about the background of sustainability and sustainable development, and then looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and how museums can use them as a kind of template for their contribution to a better future. And so, well, what is this thing, sustainability? It can be really, really mysterious. And really people talk about these two different models. The one on the right called the Mickey Mouse model, because it looks like Mickey Mouse with his big ears. And that's the model that we often have in Western societies. It's the idea that you need a strong economy in order to support these other things. It slightly doesn't work. The one on the left-hand side, the Bullseye Model, is popular with environmentalists because it makes the environment the biggest thing. And what it is saying is that society exists within the environment and the economy exists within society. And these are just different ways of representing sustainability and these three different aspects. But let's think about it a slightly different way. So I like to use the metaphor of a bank. So we're all familiar with banks as a place where we kind of store money, save money, and you can have an account and it earns interest. But what if we were to think about these three aspects of sustainability as kind of three different accounts, what are sometimes called the triple bottom line. We might have what we could think of as a kind of bank account that's for what we would call social capital, social values, social wealth, all of the incredible riches that we have in society. And to do the same for the environment, for nature, what we would call our natural capital, or natural wealth, natural riches. And so the one that is easiest to think of is prosperity, financial capital. Well, that would consist of economic wealth, but not just those things. Innovation, creativity, and enterprise. We can all think of them as a kind of prosperity, aspects of prosperity. But we could think of social capital or social prosperity, prosperous lives. What might that consist of? The relationships we have with one another, our health, diversity within our society and communities, respect for certain, trust, a rich culture, happiness, justice, fairness, and creativity. They all sound really nice, I think. Or we might think of and sorry, just to return, I didn't want to choose a picture for this, because the minute you start choosing pictures of people, it starts to, sometimes people feel left out. And our natural capital, the riches we get from nature, the wild places, beauty, lots of nature, biodiversity, protecting species, a healthy environment, clean air and water, food from nature, and nature that is functioning well, a stable environment and a stable climate. And there's a nice picture here from Latvia. And just to try to get some of these things across, that nature provides endless riches, both for nature itself and for us. And so if we think about these three bank accounts, the way that our lives work is that we can think of each of these bank accounts as including the capital, the money that's invested in them, and the interest that is earned on top. And sustainability is really just saying that you can keep going forever, so long as you're only spending the interest from the top. The minute you start eating into the capital, it means that the resource is going down. And what we could also say is that we can convert one kind of capital into another. So let's take this as an example. So we have fruit and vegetables, which we could still call a kind of natural capital, and somebody is selling them to create economic capital to support their own livelihood, their social capital. So we can see that we can move these capitals around from one place to the other. Unfortunately, the system that we often have at the moment, the economy grows, but by over-exploiting the environment, and society kind of sits somewhere in the middle. And that is really unsustainable. That can't go on forever. So what we need to try to do, although it's really hard to think of it, is if you can imagine a kind of Y-shaped, thing with three things balanced on it. Sustainability is trying to balance all of these three things, and not just to try and keep them the same, but to try to get them all to grow, so that we create economic and social and natural capital wealth over time. It's just a slightly long way of saying that we should try to leave the world in a better state than we found it. And although this structure looks really unstable, if you turn it upside down, it's really stable. And so we can think of COVID-19 as an example of this, that what you might think as a health crisis is also associated with an environmental crisis, overexploitation of nature, and it's really damaging to jobs and to the economy. So if one kind of leg of the thing is broken, the whole thing falls over. And so sustainable development, this is a concept from the late 80s, that it's, again, slightly long. It's development, or just call it activity. It meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And as I say, it's just a slightly long way of saying we should just try and leave the world in a better place than we found it. And so what are the challenges that we see? We see inequality within countries, between countries, mistrust, self-interest rather than working for the common interest, intolerance between social groups, governments make commitments that don't happen, aggressive corporate interests which maintain the status quo and mean that change isn't easy. There's a lack of political will for change because there's often a lack of public demand for it. And generally a lack of awareness of the challenges that we all face, or the disconnection between where those problems are created and where they have an impact. And so Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals were launched in 2015 to try to solve this problem, really. And they do this by building on the Millennium Development Goals, which ran before. And it's really an acknowledgement that we can't just think of problems one at a time, you know, because we might be solving one problem, but just creating a problem somewhere else. You know, by solving this one, we just make a problem somewhere else. And so the document, Transforming Our World, which you can get really easily for free on the internet, it contains a really amazing vision for the future, a future where everyone thrives. And the way to achieve that vision is through these 17 goals. So people might be familiar with the rather nice picture of the 17 goals, but they don't really make sense without a reference to transforming our world. And so the goals were developed through a big consultation exercise, and it's saying that, well, these 17 goals, these big challenges, if we could address these, that would really make the biggest difference and help us get on a path to a better future. And so the Transforming Our World is made up of kind of a vision with 5 elements: to end hunger, poverty and hunger, and to ensure that all human beings can fulfill their potential in dignity and equality and in a healthy environment. Sounds lovely. And planet, to protect the planet from degradation, including through sustainable consumption and production, sustainably managing its natural resources, and taking urgent action on climate change so that it can support the needs of the present and future generations. And prosperity, to ensure all human beings can enjoy prosperous and fulfilling lives and that economic, social and technological progress occurs in harmony with nature. And really the innovation of the Sustainable Development Goals was to recognise the importance of 2 further things. So we have peace, to foster peaceful, just and inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. There can be no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. And finally, partnership. To mobilise the means required to implement this agenda through a revitalised global partnership for sustainable development, backed by a spirit of strengthened global solidarity, focused in particular on the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable, and with the participation of all countries, all stakeholders, and all people. And the thing to note in this is that the all stakeholders means all sectors, and that means us, that means those of us who work in and with museums. But why should museums use the Sustainable Development Goals? Why can we avoid them being seen as, well, this is just something else to add on top? Well, really, the Sustainable Development Goals are just such a great thing for museums, because they can really help them do the things that many of them already want to do. So what currently happens with many museums is they're interested in sustainability, they're not quite sure what to do. Many of them would maybe do kind of their own thing, they don't have a shared language, they might not be able to form strong partnerships, and they can't tell a collective story, and those all hold them back. So using the Sustainable Development Goals can help you address all of those challenges. They can help you provide the public with meaningful activities, put our unique resources, collections, exhibitions, buildings, and so on, expertise to good use. And the next one is really important. They can help museums play a significant and distinctive part in an ambitious global agenda, but really importantly, to help them contribute to multiple agendas at the same time. Because what often tends to happen is that museums would deal with oh, there's this challenge in the news, we'll deal with this, and then that one will kind of die down a bit, and then they'll move on to the next one, then they'll move on to the next one. Working with the SDGs helps you address all of these big challenges at the same time. They really are quite amazing. They help you build partnerships and collaborations, and they help you demonstrate your value to society, which is good for your own resilience. And so let's return to this, to the goals. And I just wanted to go through them in turn, just very quickly, just so that you're all familiar with them. So firstly, poverty. And so the important thing to say as well is that although the icons are really colourful and really nice and they have a title, the title isn't the full title of the goal. So goal 1 is about ending poverty in all its forms everywhere. And it's not just about money, because people can be culturally poor as well. And that's very relevant to museums. Goal 2 is to end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. So although the icon looks like it's just about food, it's actually about and situations where people don't have enough food. I think you can see from the full title, it covers much more. So it's not just about hunger, it's about obesity, and it's also about how can we have an agricultural system that doesn't damage nature, basically. Because at the moment, certainly in Europe, the biggest threat to nature is habitat change, largely due to agriculture. Goal 3 is about ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all at all ages. And well-being is very much associated with museums and accessing culture and taking part. Goal 4 is extremely relevant to museums. It's about ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. So it's saying that education isn't just about school. Goal 5, around achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls, because women and girls in many situations, many countries are held back for various reasons. Goal 6 is around ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. So we could see that this is a more linked to a more environmental aspect. Goal 7 around ensuring that everyone has access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy. So that's moving to renewables, reducing energy wastage and so on. Goal 8 is around work, promoting sustained, inclusive, sustainable economic growth and productive employment and decent work for all. And it's worth saying in this one that people interested in sustainability often challenge this one, saying that, well, it looks like you're looking for continuous growth, which is a slight impossibility on a single planet. But it's, if we think about that in terms of how can we move to a circular economy, to creating jobs that are good for the environment, good for people and so on, and that don't lead to damage of the environment. Number 9 is about resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization and fostering innovation. And this one is really relevant to museums for a few reasons, because collections are a kind of cultural infrastructure, and museums are really a kind of powerhouse for supporting creativity and innovation and design and so on. Goal 10 is about reducing inequality within and among countries, because it's important to recognize, I mean, inequality is getting worse in many Western countries and also between countries, and that's just simply unfair. Goal 11 about, although it says cities and human settlements, I just like to think of it as where people live, inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable. And I also like to think of this one in terms of like communities might not just mean the people who live in the same place, but it might be people who work in the same area of, you know, the same sector. So we could think of museum workers as a kind of community. How can we ensure that their work and where they work are inclusive and safe and resilient and sustainable? Goal 12 is around sustainable consumption and production patterns, which is a hugely important one in the global north, because currently our challenge is overconsumption, generation of waste, which is creating lots of problems for the planet. And it's linked very much to Goal 13, which is around taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Climate change is a huge issue because it kind of amplifies all of the other challenges, makes them all harder to deal with. 14 is around life below water, conserving and sustainably using the oceans, the seas and marine resources for sustainable development, so sustaining people's lives and also the life that lives in the sea. 15 wins the competition for the one with the longest title, which I won't read all of it, but it's basically around, it's about nature conservation, ensuring that habitats are protected and well looked after, and really halting and reversing the losses that we are unfortunately seeing in many places. Goal 16 is peace, justice and strong institutions, about promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, providing access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. And so within this, this would certainly include museums as institutions, not just on their own, but the concept of a museum. What are museums for? How do they provide service to society? And I think we would pretty much all agree that museums can be really important for bringing people from different perspectives, different backgrounds together to, hopefully to develop sustainable and peaceful societies and communities. And the last one is really important, it has its own goal, is partnerships for the goals, to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalise the global partnership for sustainable development. Forget the last word, that's a mistake there. So this is saying that we need to work together. We need partnerships between different sectors, between those within the same sector and even within the same institution. If we direct ourselves towards these goals, that's the way that they're most likely to happen. So I wanted to return a bit to how these goals work, because you could think, oh, well, those are just 17 huge challenges. What could we do about them? And so the thing is to acknowledge that, so if we take Goal 4 as an example with this, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and so on, that's a huge thing. So how might we do that? And so within the Sustainable Development Goals, each goal has targets. And so I chose this one as an example, so that Goal 4 has 10 targets. The seven that you can see numbered, and the last 3 at the end, they're called means of implementation targets. And I'm not suggesting that you would use all of these, but it's to say that the targets are really much more practical than the goals. So they're as I say, they're very concrete, they're very tangible, and some of them are particularly relevant to museums. So I'm going to pick out a few of them here. So if we look at target 4.4, is to increase the number of people with relevant skills for financial success. That target's really about people having the skills for work, for productive employment, and training, which is what we're all here to do, all here for. Target 4.5 about eliminating discrimination. 4.6 is about supporting basic education, numeracy and literacy, which is particularly important for those from poorer economic backgrounds, people who have maybe immigrants who have been left behind by the education system. And that's really important because it impacts on all of their life chances, which links to all kinds of things, from poverty, you name it, exclusion, the risk of modern slavery, lots and lots of different things, and basically less fulfilled lives. 4.7, which I mentioned before, is about education for sustainable development and global citizenship, is really one that museums should focus most heavily on, because it's so relevant to our work. 4A is about making sure that we have accessible schools, but we could also think of it in terms of museums. And the last two are about supporting teachers for developing countries. And so, acknowledging that there are 17 goals, 169 targets, let's face it, it's too much for most people to, it takes quite a lot of work to get your head around. So I spent a lot of time last year thinking, well, what are the things that museums do that can really kind of align with the Sustainable Development Goals and targets? And so I wrote this guide last year, and in it I propose kind of 7 key activities, which I think are the main ways that museums can contribute to these goals and targets. And in the guide, it lines the 7 activities up with roughly a third of the targets, which is a pretty fantastic contribution when we think that these goals and targets are to address all of the challenges across all of society, the big ones. And different museums, of course, will be able to connect with additional goals and targets, depending on what subject matter they cover. So natural history museums might relate more with some of the targets in the 3 goals, which are about the natural environment. And so the thing to recognize is that the SDGs are an integrated, connected set of 17 goals that help achieve the vision of Agenda 2030, transforming our world. They apply to everyone and they apply everywhere. So these 6 steps here are things that it's a kind of plan that I thought museums could use to think about, well, how can we use these goals and targets? So the second point really is to ask yourself, what roles should you and your organisation be taking to support the vision of Agenda 2030? Thirdly, is to consider how you contribute to each goal, both positively and negatively, because it's important to not just talk about what we're good at, because that's just sounds like marketing, to be honest, but it's to talk about, well, you know, we're really committed to making a difference in the world. We acknowledge these are the things we're good at and we want to do more of, but these are the things that we're maybe not so good at and we need to address. And sustainable development is just basically about doing more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff, and that's how we move forward. So fourthly, to explore the 7 key activities in the guide, there's a lot more information in the guide, to look at, well, where are the opportunities for you to make a difference? Make a plan to enhance your positive impacts and reduce the negative ones, and of course do it, review it, refresh it, and communicate it to your stakeholders. And that it's quite simple. I think it's really, really simple. It's very simple for me to say it, but if I had one piece of advice is that nothing will ever happen without a plan. So even if it's just a tiny plan, like thinking, well, I want tomorrow to be different to today, I need to plan how it's going to be different. And so I thought I would just conclude with looking at, well, where are your 3 countries up to with the Sustainable Development Goals? So this comes from a report called the Sustainable Development Report, comes out each year. And it's produced by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and it assesses the country's progress in relation to each of the goals, and it uses its own methods that you can look at you can have a look at the website there, and you can see exactly how these are calculated. And so if it's a traffic light system, that green means that the SDG has been achieved. Yellow means that challenges remain. Orange, there are significant challenges. Red, major challenges. And grey means that there's no information. So I think from here we can see that this is showing that for 2 of the goals, at least according to this report, there's very, very good progress for 2 of these goals, and variable levels of progress for others. And the way that you could think about this is, well, thinking about each of these goals, if there are aspects of your work or your museum that speak very directly to some of those goals, you might think, well, this is a great opportunity for me to make a difference to Latvia. But of course, it's not just, sustainable development isn't just about where you are now, it's about the speed that you're headed to something. So this shows the trends for those goals. And you can see, although some of these goals maybe don't look so great, but at least things look to be heading in the right direction. And I've done the same thing for Estonia. Again, you can see the thing which is very interesting to look at with this report is that even the very wealthy countries, and even countries that you would think, well, they must have a great track record for sustainability. When you look at their report, it's not always quite like that. But what is very interesting is to see even how countries which are even next door to one another can be really different. So we all have our own challenges, but we also all have our own opportunities to address them. And so here are the trends for Estonia. So you can see that so for a lot of these, they are heading in the right direction. And the last one, I have the same thing for Lithuania. So as I say, you might think, well, oh, actually, there's a bit more focus needed there, and we can really do something for that. That would seem to be a good use of museums. And then again, finally, just the trends. It's important to say that when the report was put together, because I imagine it takes a long time to put, because it's a really thorough report, although it came out in mid-2020, of course, we've had the whole COVID situation, which is really going to have put very serious challenges for activity for a lot of these things. So that's kind of, we'll see what the report looks like next year. And so I put together a lot of information. There's a lot, because one of the great things with the Sustainable Development Goals is because they're mainstreamed across all of the big agents, most big agencies, sectors, that there's a lot of resources available. ICOM last year adopted this resolution on sustainability. There's a webinar that I did. There's another one that Jasper Visser did, and these various other pieces of information. And so I did say, like in these webinars, that I wanted to ask people to have a bit of a think about their own work. So what I'd slightly encourage you to do is to have a look at your own museum's vision and mission, and based on these, just to ask yourself, what role should you be playing in sustainability? Should you be a leader or a follower or a partner or something else? And then to think again, say, well, what are we doing currently? Are you doing are you achieving what you want to, or is more action needed? And that's the end of this talk. So thank you and good luck with your work.